Everyone's heard of haunted homes, haunted objects, cursed objects, sometimes even haunted and possessed people. The following stories are actually going to be that of cursed families. One thing that affects the entire family and brings them nothing but pain and misery through their everyday life. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the horror. Every man in my family drowns on his 33rd birthday. Tomorrow I turn 33. I know it's crazy, right? The first time that I heard every man in my family drowns on his 33rd birthday, I was 5 years old and my grandmother was trying to scare me back to bed. She said the mermaids would come for me early if I don't do what I'm told. Complete nonsense. At least I thought it was. My dad was in the Navy and drowned during a military training exercise that went tragically wrong. I never knew him. My mom was 6 months pregnant at the time. It's not easy raising a kid alone, I'm sure. But my grandmother and Aunt Jane, both on my father's side, were always there to help us. I never really knew anyone else on my father's side of the family. Granddad had died a long time before I was born, and Jane never married or had kids. After the first time Gran told me about the mermaid, she'd used the trick for years to keep me in line, telling me about their slimy tails, fangs, and taloned fingers. How my ancestors long ago had killed one of their kind only for a blood curse to be placed upon the men of each generation. The sins of the father, and all that crap. I still can't believe I'm writing this, that any of this is happening. I hadn't thought about mermaids or the curse in decades. When I was 9, my mom caught my gran telling me about how I was going to die and forbade her from ever talking about that nonsense again. I remember that night perfectly. They'd screamed at each other by the end of it all. Gran insisted the curse was real and that it had taken her father-in-law, her husband, and her son. That's when my mom broke down into tears and Gran finally relented. She never spoke of it again, but I always felt like I could see it in her eyes, a grim certainty and a sympathy of sorts. Gran died in a car crash a few years later, and naturally I barely even thought about her strange stories again. Except on every birthday. I try not to, but damn it, when your own grandmother keeps insisting you're gonna die on your 33rd birthday, I dare you not to try thinking about it as years tick closer. I mean, I always brushed the thoughts off, or I did until last year, my 32nd birthday, and I couldn't help myself. I did one of those genealogy surveys and started digging into my family on my dad's side. That's when shit got scary. My dad's death checked out as expected, dying on his 33rd birthday. Then I looked at my grandfather's date of death. December 2nd, 1954. Cause of death, drowning. I remember breathing in sharply at the cause of death. I shook it off and checked the date of birth, December 2nd, 1921, 33 years earlier. That's when I jumped out of my chair in a panic. It's also about the last thing I remember from my 32nd birthday. I hit the liquor pretty hard after that. About a week later, I hired a professional genealogist to dig through my family's history. He came back to me a week later. Every single paternal son in my family had died on their 33rd birthday. Every single death he could account for was listed as drowning. He'd even traced the start of the phenomenon back to a Navy frigate that sank somewhere off the northern coast of Spain during the Napoleonic Wars in 1812. The ship was called the Chiron. I gotta be honest with you, my life's gone to the shit can since I found all this crazy shit out. I've been drinking a lot. Hell, I got fired from my job after things went too far, and that barely slowed me down. I mean, I've never been in the sea. The idea always freaked me out given the way my dad died. I've been thinking about him a lot this past year. Did he know about all this too? How did he handle it? I hate the answers my mind gives back. Maybe I'm just weak. He carried on doing what he loved right until the last moment. Me, I've spent the supposed final year of my life sinking into financial and emotional ruin. I avoided telling my mom about any of this for the past year. In fact, I hadn't seen her in 9 months when I finally showed up on her front door drunk as a skunk one night. She took me in, cleaned me up, and listened to all of my craziness. At the end of it all, she told me it was in my head. How could it possibly be true? Maybe we need to go see the doctor. There must be something wrong with me. We argued just like she and Gran had, then I left angry. I never even said goodbye. 3 days ago, I started having the same dream over and over again. Strobes of light as this oily mass of wet flesh and bones crawled towards me, climbing over my legs, my body lying there paralyzed, immersed in the dark, fetid waters. I can hear myself screaming in the dream, trying to make my arms fight it off, but nothing happens. I can feel its sharp talons even. ripping my skin as it grips harder and harder, crushing the bones beneath. Then it's above me, and all I can see is a black void of horror staring back, and I can't stop screaming. That's how I wake up, pissing myself, screaming. I just stripped my bed again and started writing this. I'm looking at the clock now, it's 11:42. I turned 33 in 8 minutes. And I don't want to die. Here's a little background about myself. I'm a 21-year-old female and my name is Logan. I'm a Southern belle who lives in southwest Georgia. This happens to be when I was just 12 years old. I had never had any paranormal experience before that. This particular year, I had just started middle school and was going through an awkward phase. I remember this day so well. I had just arrived at school, I got my breakfast as usual, and went to my homeroom to eat before school started. I was only there for 15 minutes when my cousin and I were called to the front. When I got there, I saw my stepmom in tears. I knew this had something to do with my grandfather. He became sick over the summer, his kidneys were failing, and he had cancer that spread throughout his body. The ride to my grandparents' house was quiet. It was cold that October morning, but as soon as I got out of the car, the air seemed colder. I walked into the house. The house was usually filled with happiness and good vibes, but today it was filled with grief. I walked into the room where my grandfather had been staying. When I saw him, he was stiff and all the color from his body was gone. The skin was cold. I fell to my knees. I had never felt that kind of hurt before. On October 19, 2009, I lost my best friend. A month or so after his death, my grandmother could no longer stay in that house because she couldn't continue living with his memory. It didn't feel normal with him not being there. She wanted to sell the house, but we didn't want her to. The house is where our family felt at home. This was home for everyone. My father told her that he would take the house and he would pay her rent every month. I was excited to move in because that is where I spent my days after school with my cousins until our parents came to pick us up after work. It was my childhood home. Everything seemed normal when we first moved in. I felt like I was at home. Every morning when I woke up, my rug that I had beside my bed looked like someone tripped over it. When my grandfather was alive, one of his legs was paralyzed. He was a Vietnam soldier, so it happened as the result of the war. He would drag his foot when he walked and sometimes tripped over things like rugs, so I figured it was just him watching over me while I was sleeping. I felt his presence in the house often, so it didn't really bother me that much. We would be sitting in the living room watching TV when suddenly the door to the room he died in would open on its own. My brother slept in that room and he said he could feel his presence at times. It started off with little things like that. Months went by. I started to notice some things that weren't normal. I would be home alone and I'd feel an overwhelming sense of fear. I didn't feel comfortable at all. One night while I was sleeping, my dad randomly woke up. We always left the bathroom light on so the house wouldn't be completely dark. He could faintly see something that looked like my grandfather but was completely evil. His eyes were completely black. It choked my dad until he was almost unconscious one time. He somehow managed to escape. He ran to the bathroom trying to catch his breath. My stepmom didn't wake up until she heard him gasping for air in the bathroom. This particular experience didn't happen in the house, but it happened to one of my cousins. He was home alone one day while watching TV. He kept hearing this noise like someone behind him, but nobody was there. His dog was growling at someone in the kitchen, but he didn't see anyone. He went back to the living room to watch TV when he heard glass breaking in the kitchen. He went back in there and he saw the same thing my dad saw. It looked like our grandfather, but it wasn't him. Its eyes were completely black and just plain evil. He ran outside to call our aunt to come pick him up. He didn't stay at the house alone for a while after that. Now I'm going to take some time to explain this better. My grandfather was a kind man. He would never hurt anyone in his family. He loved us deeply, especially his grandchildren. There was nothing evil about him, so this thing could not possibly be him. My cousins and I have explored the idea of maybe this was a family curse since it started happening after he died. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something going on that we don't know about. Back to my story. Things in the house seemed to get worse. I never saw the thing myself, but I definitely felt it. One summer afternoon, while my parents were at work and I was home alone, I was in the living room watching the High School Musical, and I hear something in my parents' bedroom. Their bed was so old it would squeak every time someone got on there. Our only dog at the time was in the living room with me, so there's no way it could have been her. It sounded like someone was on the bed. I called my grandmother to tell her what's happening. She told me she moved out because she was experiencing things in the house as well, and she thought it was her husband. She didn't think it would harm anyone. I called my aunt to come get me because I couldn't stay alone anymore. Whatever this thing was, it was affecting me mentally. I was struggling with my sexual orientation at the time. I grew up extremely religious, so I was so ashamed of myself for having these feelings for other women. I honestly feel like I was on the verge of being possessed. I was suicidal. All I wanted to do was kill myself so I wouldn't have to be tortured anymore. Every time I tried overdosing, no matter how hard I tried to keep the pills down, they would always come back up. This thing was not going to let me die. I know it wanted my torture to be slow. My family was being torn apart. We were always arguing with each other. My dad and stepmom almost got a divorce. My dad and I had always been close, but we were always arguing over some things, usually small things. Every time I came home, I didn't feel like I was at home anymore. It didn't feel like this was the house I would spend most of my childhood playing with my cousins. It didn't feel like the house I made so many good memories with my family. It felt like I was walking into hell every time I came home. I'm not a religious person at all, but that's what it felt like. Every time we experienced something in the house, we didn't react much to it anymore. It became the new normal. We were literally sharing a home with evil, vile, demonic thing. It was springtime of my 8th grade year when we finally decided to move out of the house so my grandmother could sell it. We were so tired of dealing with this thing, we hoped that moving away would solve everything. We moved into a new house. It felt good to have a fresh start. I was finally coming to terms with who I am as a person and embracing it. The house we moved into was haunted as well, but nothing like what we were dealing with before. I was 12 years old when those things started happening, and I'm 21 now and still have nightmares about what I went through in that house. I still feel like it's never left. I can occasionally feel its presence. My cousins still see it occasionally. I don't know what it is or why it's with us, but it's still here. No matter what we do, it will always be with us. It's one of those things you have to learn to accept and deal with, because this is our family's new curse. My mom is Native American, Oglala Lakota to be precise. All of my life, I've grown up knowing about the creatures and ghosts that live with us. My mom became very ill a few years ago, and I gave up working to nurse her. As such, we became a multi-generational family. My grandmother, my mom, and myself. Soon we'd add my husband to the mix. He's gone Monday through Friday with work, so we don't see him a lot. Our last apartment was nice, high ceilings, wood floors, and a rickety old service elevator for my grandmother. The only issue was the knocking and name calling. You'd hear random knocks on the door and something would call your name. It mimicked the voices in the house, but it was never malicious. It was never calling you into a dark hallway to possess you. It seemed to be having fun. It'd throw its voice from a direction the person it was calling you was, so that it could watch the confusion. The heating bills became outrageous because the landlord refused to do anything to insulate the building, and the storefront below the apartments had been empty for years. Frustrated, we decided to buy a house across town. The house was vacant because the owner, who inherited it from her parents, has Parkinson and is living in a home. No children, never married, and this house had been in her family since the 40s. The activity continued here, knocking and name calling. It didn't feel any different from before until we started moving things, knocking things over. 6 months ago, it escalated again. This time it was solely directed at me. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to a shadow man standing over my bed. At first, it felt like he was curious, and then he'd leave when asked to leave. Now he doesn't go away when asked, and I've become scared of the dark. Now, this wasn't a new thing. I've been scared of the dark almost my whole life. The things my mom and I attract seem to come out in the dark, but the calm of the past few years had allowed me to relax about it. I started enjoying the dark and the deep sleep it brought. So I started leaving my computer monitor on to a screensaver at night, but that wasn't enough. I would still be woken by his presence in the middle of the night. Not to be deterred, I decided that I needed to keep music on. Still, I'd wake up and feel his presence occasionally. I finally gave up and told my mom that he was still hanging around. She decided that she needed to cleanse the house using sage. It went fine the first 2 nights, and I was able to sleep with the TV off for the first time in months. The third night, however, I was taking a bath while she was saging the house. As I laid in the tub, I hear her fall, and the carpet started on fire. "It tripped me," she said as we started to dump water onto the burning carpet. I asked her if she was sure, and she reiterated that it tripped her. She put some more sage in her smudge bowl and did the whole house again without incident. We finished her sage, and she has gone to get more. We haven't had any for a few days, but last night I came into my room to watch Dexter with my husband, and the scent of the burning sage was clearly present. I asked my mom if she had bought some more, and she said she hasn't. I've never had a smell mimic before. This is new. Does anybody have any idea what could be cursing my family? My aunt was a con artist, and she learned from the best. Her father, Grandpa, never made it big, but he lived for the game. Staying under the radar was probably what made sure he never did get caught. Not once, and he was so proud of that. Mom didn't take up the family business. She got religion instead and married a tax accountant. It's so ironic that it sounds like a joke, but it's true. Dad was the best for helping out with math homework. Mom's more colorful relations were kept at a figurative arm's length throughout my childhood, lest they'd corrupt me into following more interesting life paths. Aunt Cassie was the only one who could wiggle her way into my life. She was fully licensed as a psychologist, which made her a smidge more respectable. But Aunt Cassie used her ability to read a person in a whole different way. One probably not intended by the university who issued her degree. Aunt Cassie was a bona fide psychic. She had a shop and everything. Crystals, herbs, candles, anything you need to fill the mystic void in your life could be bought for a healthy markup at her little store. There was even a private room in the back, which she used for seance and readings. Because both my folks worked, I would often get dropped off at the shop where I would help Aunt Cassie out with those little shows. Anything from messing with the lights to knocking on the walls. Playing with the thermostat was my idea, and it was an effective one. Customers came to get chills down their spine, didn't they? So why not provide? Cassie helped me become the skeptic I am today. Showed me all the behind the scenes sleight of hand stuff. We'd watch daytime talk shows with magicians and mediums, and Cassie would explain every step from a basic rundown of cold readings to how to spot an audience plant. After one particularly convincing episode, I asked a natural question. Couldn't some of it be real? My aunt's reply was firm. The dead don't talk, kiddo. Anyone who claims otherwise is blowing smoke out of their ass. It was her conviction, more than anything, that made me believe her. There was only one client I ever saw my aunt refuse. He was old, bald, and stooped. Took his hat off when he came inside, and twisted it in his hands as he talked. Cassie tensed up immediately when she saw him. The man claimed to have worked in the prison system, death row. He'd been responsible for carrying out final punishments of the worst convicted criminals on the planet. In his old age, this tormented him, ate his soul. He wanted Cassie to contact the souls of the ones he killed so he could apologize and beg forgiveness before he joined them. My aunt threw the most epic fit. I'd never seen her so mad. She hollered and threw things, shouting for him to get out, 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 shut up, get out. I hid under the counter with my hands over my ears until he left. Later, I thought her reaction was one of fear because of the man's jobs. As an executioner, he has to be a con artist's worst fear. Eventually, I got found out. I wanted to put on a magic show for my folks, and stupidly I thought I'd do a medium bit where I pretended to talk to Grandpa for Mom since she missed him so much. Huge mistake. Mom freaked the hell out and banned me from ever seeing her sister again. I'd left some textbooks at the shop though, so I got to run in and grab them while Mom fumed in the car outside. Aunt Cassie didn't even have to ask what was wrong. She could read my face after all. I gave her a hug and a teary, snot-filled goodbye. She did tell me one last secret though. Kiddo, there's a curse in this family that gets passed like a torch. I hope to whatever gods might be out there that I don't pass it to you when I go. We didn't get to talk again for more than 9 years. That's when Facebook entered popular public sphere and no parental ban could keep me from trying to reconnect. It was awkward. She had a tough go at life, diagnosed with schizoid disorder that took her business from her. To pay bills, she went legitimate, and with her business went all of her zest and playful passion for life. One day I got home to a message waiting in my inbox that made my stomach drop to the floor. I love you, kiddo. Remember what I told you. I dialed her number, already crying. No answer. Didn't stop me from dialing again and again and again and again. I was too much of a mess to tell my mom. The police did that for me the next day. Car accident, drunk driver. The funeral was a blur. Relatives I'd never seen in the flesh back in the church. I sat between my parents in the front row and racked my brain trying to figure out what it was my aunt wanted me to remember. We followed the hearse to the cemetery in dead silence. The priest did the last little speeches, and then I was left alone by her headstone, still straining to remember. Snatches of my parents' conversation floated in and out of my attention span. Only if Cassie hadn't been so cryptic. Expecting such a small turnout. It's a shame. Small turnout, that bothered me. The service had practically been stuffed to the rafters. I turned around to say something and finally understood. Behind my parents, there was a whole host of people, all standing and staring dead ahead. My parents weren't paying them the slightest attention. The priest muttered some soothing condolences and excused himself, walked right through the thick of the crowd without disturbing a single soul. At the head of the group, looking just like the day I'd seen her last, was Cassie. All the rest in peace sentiment in the world wouldn't have done her any good. Her mouth was wide, wide, wide open, and just like that I knew. I knew what the family curse is. I know why the dead don't talk. They're too busy screaming. I hope you enjoyed the 4 previous stories of cursed families. If you're enjoying the content, please feel free to subscribe and like the videos so that way we may bring you further future content from around the world, from your backyard, or from your own experience.